Welcome back. So I want to talk a little bit about gearing. I absolutely love the 22 gearbox on the new Grom. It's the same one on the Monkey. Because it now has 5 speeds with the stock 15-tooth front sprocket, it definitely feels quick off of the line. And then with a 5th gear, the final drive gear on the new bike is a 38-tooth rear sprocket. It was a 34-tooth on the previous model. But because the transmission has 5 gears now, it can get a little bit of both sides that you want. On the previous Grom, and just like on my 2019 Monkey, one of the first things I did before I was doing any power mods was putting on that 14-tooth front sprocket, so bringing it down a tooth in the front, which definitely gave the bike a lot more pickup. It lost a little bit on the top end, but most of the riding that you do on a bike like this is just around town. I know I do these top speed runs just because I'm curious, but it's about finding that right balance of power and gearing so that the bike is really rideable. I still have the stock gearing in this bike, the 15-tooth front sprocket and the 38-tooth rear sprocket. Now that I'm making a bit more power, based on the dyno results, about 50% power over stock, I do want to see if I can get a little bit more top end by changing the gear ratio and also just make it a little bit more rideable through all the gears. Now that I have that added power, first gear runs through very quickly and so does second gear, such that I'm hardly spending any time in either of them. So I want to make some gearing changes to see if I can, again, just get a little more balance across the entire gear range. Instead of just going straight to the front sprocket and moving it up to a 16, I'd like to see what type of benefits I can get by going a tooth at a time on the rear sprocket. Based on some simple math, I think it's about 2.5 teeth in the rear equals 1 tooth in the front. So I'm actually going to start very incrementally and only go 1 tooth lower. So I've got a 37-tooth super light. The brand is super light. I'll actually weigh to see how much lighter it is. Super light brand, rear sprocket. It's the 420 width. And this is from Steady Garage. I'll link this in the description below. The other big benefit to going with a lighter rear sprocket is that this is rotational mass. It's also unsprung, so taking weight off this portion of the bike will definitely make it feel like it's picking up a lot more quickly. The installation should be really straightforward. There's only 4 nuts that hold this on, so it's just a matter of taking off the wheel, pulling off the old sprocket, and getting this one on, and then we'll see what type of differences it makes to the ride of this bike. All right, so now that it's off the bike, the stock 38 tooth doesn't feel as heavy as I thought it would be. It feels actually pretty comparable. It's definitely uglier though. It's got this extra railing here, I think, to prevent the chain from coming off and across your swing arm if it jumps off of the sprocket. But yeah, not too much difference in weight. 396 grams versus 312 grams. So 84 grams difference. Damn. All right, so on the 2022 Grom, these rear bolts are M10 bolts. On my 2019 Monkey, it's M8, so that's why it doesn't fit, and my guess then is that until they make 2022 specific rear sprockets, they're not going to fit. So I'm going to have to drill these holes out. All right, so I drilled these out to be M10 holes. And nice tight fit. I couldn't find a torque rating for these, so I'm just going to torque them down to 20 foot-pounds. These are lock nuts, so I don't think they're going to back off. Since I'm only adjusting a single tooth on this, I shouldn't have to make any changes to the chain. I've got enough play back and forth in the swing arm space here, so I should be okay. For the final adjustments, you want it off the swing arm stand so that you can actually see what the chain tension is when it's under normal tension. And the rear wheel torques down to 44 foot-pounds.
Okay, so another gorgeous morning here in Southern California, so I'm doing a bit of riding to feel out the new 37-tooth rear sprocket. So far it feels great. First and second gear feel a lot more rideable. The gear also just looks so much cooler. I know a lot of what I do is for the aesthetic, but I really hated the way that old rear sprocket looked, and this one looks awesome. With this chicane edge shock on the rear now, the bike feels completely planted. The front suspension setup made a pretty big difference in the ride of the bike, but now having also this rear suspension in conjunction with the front, the bike feels like a completely new ride. So loving that. Still making some small tweaks on the rear shock as I dial that in, but this bike feels amazing now. On the last video that I posted about the rear shock, somebody commented about the small amount of tolerance that I have here between the spring and the exhaust pipe, and that the spring may get heat soaked and lose performance. I hadn't actually considered that, but after riding around today, when we get back to the house, I'll go ahead and put a temp gun onto the spring to see if it's picking up heat. Seeing that it's only the bottom two coils that are even close to it, and again there's about 5 or 6 millimeters of space, I don't think that it's going to be enough to heat up that whole coil, but we'll go ahead and take a look at that. So let me get on the bike. I'd like to go do a top speed run on the same place that I did last time. So I'm definitely pleased with how the new sprocket feels. First and second gear are a lot more usable now. Now, this is actually uphill, so it took even longer to get through those gears, but before first and second gear were to the point where they both just blip through, and I'd have to get to third gear far sooner than I'd expect to. So I'm going to hop onto the same stretch of highway. Yeah, I'm surprised how close the GPS is to the readout here. I wonder if the setup is different, that you don't need a speedo healer. Oh man, I was in the wrong lane. Alright, gonna have to make another U-turn and then we'll get on the freeway. But on my 2019 Honda Monkey, when I put on the 14-tooth front sprocket, it threw the speedometer reading way off, so I'm not sure why this is so close. Again, it was a pretty minor change this time, just one tooth in the rear, but we'll rely on the GPS readout here. That's always going to be way more accurate than whatever the speedo is showing. Alright. It's uphill for a little while here and then it levels out. So rev limiter in third gear. Alright, so that was interesting. I actually wasn't able to hit the rev limiter in fourth gear this time. It was sitting right up at like 10,000 RPM, but never started pegging off of the rev limiter. I also only got a max speed that time of 72.7 miles an hour, so that was actually a reduction of about 1.5 miles per hour in top speed. So I think what that means is just the bike isn't making enough power to try to gear down in the back and get any, at least top speed benefit out of it. Again, not being able to hit the rev limiter in fourth gear, I think the gear was just too tall for the engine to be able to keep moving through. So I'm going to leave this gear on. I'm obviously not usually running on the freeway at 72 miles an hour, and I have bigger engine modifications planned, so I expect it to become more beneficial after I make some more power. Alright, so I'm almost back home, but I realized I never even tried to get into fifth gear last time. I'm wondering if at 10,000 RPM I'm just in a place in the power band that I'm not making as much power. So since I was in fifth gear last time I did that top speed run, for apples to apples comparison, I'm going to hop back on the freeway real quick, do one more run and get to fifth gear, see if that makes any difference in the overall top speed. so I ran into a little bit of traffic there. I couldn't keep going. It looked like it was going to end up being about the same top speed. I saw 72.4 and it was still going a little more, but it looks like overall about the same. So it probably is just overgeared now, or at least overgeared for trying to do a ridiculous top speed run. I think it is a much more practical gearing setup for just running around town, which again is what you should be doing on this bike. But in the interest of experimenting, I am going to keep trying to make more power and adjust the gearing to figure out exactly what I can get the bike to do. All right, now let's get back to the house and check the temperature of the exhaust and the spring. All right, toll tag survived. Let's take a look at these temps though. So the exhaust header up here at the back is only showing 94 degrees. The spring is showing 86 degrees at the coil portion closest, 88 degrees at the portion closest to the exhaust. So I'm not too worried about that. I've been ringing this bike out pretty good for the last 20 minutes, and honestly, the exhaust you can actually barely touch, so it's not getting too hot. Definitely not enough that it transferred enough heat to damage the spring or impact its effectiveness. So I think the gearing change made the bike more rideable overall, but it did lose a little bit of top speed. I think it's just the engine doesn't yet have enough power to overcome that gearing. So as I add more power, I think that'll improve the top speed, but we'll see as I continue to try to find that right balance. Anyway, thank you everybody for watching. Stay tuned for more videos and keep on building.